Although everyone loves to play a wholesome video game like Mario Odyssey and Animal Crossing, there's nothing quite like that one game that features truly messed up characters. After all, it's easy to create a moralistically pure hero, but it is far, far harder to create one that's uniquely twisted. Mercifully, many developers are more than up to the challenge, creating figures that will leave you thinking about them in a cold sweat years from when you first saw them. And yet, you're still tempted to replay the games they feature in, seemingly just to spite yourself. While the vast majority of these nightmare children are horror villains, disturbing video game characters aren't limited to that genre whatsoever. Even fighting games have seen their fair share of unsettling and insane individuals every now and then. From a serial killer pig to an evil ghost child, there is truly no limit to how depraved some creators are willing to let their characters be. And we can only applaud their daring and nefarious creativity. Well, applaud it, and also fear it in equal measure. I'm Will for WhatCulture, and here are the 10 most twisted video game characters ever. 10. J.S. Steinman, BioShock. Given that BioShock takes place in an underwater utopia turned dystopia, almost everyone in it could be deemed twisted, as most people didn't take the whole trapped miles underwater without escape thing very well. Of this collection of miscreants, the most macabre has to be J.S. Steinman. A renowned surgeon who specialized in cosmetic surgery, Steinman accepted his invitation to the underwater land of Rapture in order to see if he could further revolutionize the field while surrounded by the world's supposed greatest minds. What actually happened is that he would instead get addicted to a chemical substance that allowed the user to alter their genetic makeup, which had the incidental side effect of driving him completely insane. Still obsessed with plastic surgery, Steinman would decide to focus on creating the perfect-looking person, on unwilling subjects. By the time you find Stein, he's murdered countless people in his drug-addled attempts to alter people's appearances. Beauty is pain, as they say. 9. Evelyn, Resident Evil 7. The story of Evelyn is a decidedly morally complicated one. On the one hand, Evelyn is basically just a child with monumental powers who wants to be loved and cared for. Created as a bioweapon who could infect people with mold in order to control them, she was naturally regarded with a lot of fear by those charged with watching her. Evelyn doesn't really appear to have been taught manners or even to not murder people in order to get what she wants. But this childish streak would quickly become a sadistic one, as the bioweapon baby would escape and then infect the family who took her in, using her powers to warp them all into terrifying monsters who were unable to free themselves from her control. This is exactly what makes the character so terrifying, as she is simultaneously a sympathetic character and an awfully cruel tyrant. Also, she becomes a terrifying ooze monster at the end, which lands her pretty solidly in the spooky bad guy category. 8. Dylan, Dead Rising 3. One of the coolest things about Dead Rising 3 is that the major villains are all based around the 7 deadly sins. This makes for some majorly interesting enemies, like the embodiment of greed, a doctor who's been using the zombie apocalypse to harvest organs to sell, or Envy, a man you initially rescue from zombies who becomes overwhelmed by his desire to be like the game's protagonist. They're all pretty out there characters, but one of them goes that little bit further than the others. That is the game's embodiment of lust, Dylan. Dylan is found in an adult store in full leather gimpy attire, and wielding a flamethrower which has 2 circular canisters attached. He wields this in exactly the way you'd think the man representing lust would, complete with his death cries featuring oil spurting out of the device. He also speaks entirely in sexual references and slang, if that wasn't already very, very obvious. Oh, and you can temporarily stun him by doing a pole dance. Dead Rising really did think of everything when it came to this one. 7. LELAND VANHORN, Condemned Criminal Origins. Now, initially, LELAND, the main antagonist of Condemned Criminal Origins and its sequel, didn't seem like too bad of a villain. Sure, he was murdering a whole lot of people, but those people were largely other serial killers, who he targeted to try and give his violent tendencies a healthier output. Then the series' sequel hit, and VANHORN was suddenly kidnapping homeless people, performing sick experiments on them by improving them with embedded metal pieces. He made them fight it out in a makeshift arena to see which of his test subjects had become the strongest. It's a very quick turn from evil to super evil, and it's done so well that you're left wondering how you didn't realize it would happen in the first place. Brilliantly, you could realize this in the first game, as shooting LELAND in the head doesn't kill him, hinting that the developers had more plans going forward. 6. Dr. Faustus. Thrill kill. When a game is pulled from release by its publisher because it's simply too violent, you know it's got to be something magnificently messed up. This was the exact case of Thrill Kill, a 1998 fighting game that was cancelled just before being shipped as EA felt like the game's incredibly violent nature would stunt their image as a company. But it managed to sneak its way into the world regardless, as the developers leaked it to the public instead. When you see characters like Dr. Faustus, it's not hard to think of why it was considered so damn controversial. Every character in Thrill Kill is completely twisted, because it's a fighting tournament that takes place in hell amongst damned souls, but the disturbing Doctor is the absolute worst. A Los Angeles plastic surgeon with a penchant for dissection, the good doc would end up murdering several patients due to his unchecked bloodlust. More disturbingly yet, 27 cases of Faustus' malpractice would go unpunished by the courts, as they were regarded as merely innocent, botched surgeries. To complete the wild ride that is the character, Faustus would die after trying to surgically attach a bear trap to his face in the place of his jaw, which would, unsurprisingly, kill the guy. 5. Needles KANE. Twisted Metal. As Needles KANE, also known by Sweet Tooth in reference to the car he drives, is literally in a game called Twisted Metal, it was perhaps destiny that he ended up on this list. Not only does Needles play on everyone's instinctive fear of clowns, especially homicidal ones, but he actively delights in causing misery and suffering, which he also, coincidentally, excels at doling out. Indeed, this dude is so evil that he's actively trapped his former sane personality, Marcus KANE, away in his head, to such a strong degree that Needles doesn't even remember that he and Marcus are one and the same. By the fourth game, Sweet Tooth manages to get even worse, as he defeats Calypso to rule over the Twisted Metal tournament, meaning at this point he has control over a small army of similarly unnerving clowns. 4. Eddie GLUSKIN. Outlast Whistleblower. Anyone who has played the DLC for the first Outlast game has almost definitely tried to repress memories of the infamous Eddie GLUSKIN at some point after playing it. A serial killer who targeted women, Eddie was subjected to experimental and highly illegal practices via morphogenic engine, which is intended to make its subject able to control the mysterious entity known as the Walrider. However, Eddie, like most of the people exposed to the engine, proves unreceptive to the machine, which causes his body to basically tear itself apart, resulting in the lesions visible in his face and eyes, as well as making him go even more insane. As such, by the time the player finds good old Ed, he's doing exactly what he does best and murdering everyone. More specifically, GLUSKIN kidnaps men he comes into contact with in the asylum and tries to make them his perfect wife by removing their genitals and any body hair he finds. Saying it's a little intense may be the world's biggest understatement. 3. Sachiko Shinozaki. Corpse Party. Among the most gruesome and terrifying cast of Corpse Party's villain roster, Sachiko, a young girl in a simple red dress, really doesn't seem all that scary. In fact, it's easy to initially presume that the kid is a poor victim of the haunted school our heroes are trapped in. But it is basically the opposite, as it turns out that the ghost girl is actually one of the worst spirits to walk the heavenly host's halls, using her innocent appearance to befriend the living students who get trapped in the school, before torturing and brutally murdering them. Worst yet, Sachiko managed to gain control over the zombie body of the school's former teacher, forcing him to kidnap children who find themselves in Heavenly Host. From here, they're either killed with a sledgehammer or brought to her so she can kill them in even more disturbing ways. While it turns out that she is a somewhat sympathetic character, as it's revealed her twisted nature is due to being murdered after seeing her mother be also killed, and her violence is in retaliation, she's also intensely terrifying regardless. 2. The Dollmaker. Alice Madness Returns. With American McGee's dark imagining of Alice in Wonderland being one of the most disturbing ever, many fans were apprehensive when it was revealed that the game would get a sequel a whole 11 years later, as it was feared it might lack some of the edginess of the first game. Those worries were decidedly put to bed with the sequel's main antagonist, the Dollmaker. Not only is the Dollmaker physically terrifying, as he's all doll parts and black deadly ooze where his facial features should be, but he manages to be even more disturbing for what he represents. Because the Dollmaker is Alice's mind manifesting a physical monster to represent her psychiatrist, Dr. Angus Bumby. Despite his hilarious name, Bumby is anything but, using his job to hypnotize the orphans he was supposed to be helping to instead become sex slaves. His attempt to do this to Alice also has a much darker purpose, as she is the only one to know that he is responsible for having killed the Littles, after he molested Lizzie Little, Alice's sister, and trapped the family in a burning house so they could never tell anyone what happened. In short, he is the absolute worst, and so it's a welcome relief when Alice finishes the second game by pushing him into the path of an oncoming train. 1. Pigsy Manhunt. No list on messed up video game characters would be complete without the patron saint of weird, awful maniacs known as Pigsy, who is legitimately frightening enough that he would have been a fantastic horror villain. Instead, he's the epicenter of creepy characters in a game called Manhunt, which takes place in a world where certain criminals sentenced to the death penalty are made to be part of sadistic snuff films where they either murder many hired goons or are otherwise killed themselves. Of all the various henchmen involved in this insidious plot, the very worst is Pigsy, who is always shown wearing a skinned pig's head over his own. After being driven insane by taking place in several of Dr. Starkweather's special films, Pigsy would lose his mind and his humanity, speaking largely through pig grunts from this point onwards. Starkweather would keep Pigsy in his basement and feed him on the less than stellar diet of solely human flesh, likely taken from those who died in the production of further movies. Even if you didn't know all of this, the Pigman would surely top this list, as a mostly naked man armed only with some underwear, a pig's head and a chainsaw is frightening with or without context. And there you have it, folks, the 10 most twisted video game characters ever. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at @USlyDollU. I'm Will for WhatCulture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.